Mi-a zis mami să mă duc până la baie repejor, pentru că mi-a luat Dalin, cel mai bun și cel mai fin. Și mi-a zis deschide ochii, nu te ustură deloc. Cu Dalin i-am deschis, nu mă ustură, v-am zis.
Dalin, șamponul preferat al copilului.
In the 1950s, most UFO cases involved sightings of unusual aircraft or lights in the night sky. In addition, there were the contactee cases, where individuals reported communication with UFO occupants, often depicted as friendly and wise. But in the fall of 1961, a New England couple encountered a UFO that dramatically changed their lives and raised new questions about the intentions of UFOs. Betty and Barney Hill might seem unlikely candidates to rewrite UFO history. Betty was a department supervisor in the state government. Barney worked for the Postal Service. They were driving home to New Hampshire from a vacation in Canada when their encounter began. As they motored down Route 3 in the isolated White Mountains, Betty noticed a curious star in the sky that seemed to be following their car. The Hills stopped the car as the light got closer to them. Peering through binoculars, Barney reported seeing red, amber, and green flashing lights. Panicked, Barney jumped back in the car and started speeding down the road. When the Hills arrived home to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, they realized that the trip had taken 2 hours longer than expected. Within days of their sighting, Betty Hill began having nightmares in which she and Barney were taken aboard a flying saucer and then medically examined. The Hills filed a sighting report with NICAP, a newly formed UFO research group. Then the emotional trauma from their experience prompted Barney and Betty Hill to seek the help of Dr. Benjamin Simon, a prominent Boston psychiatrist. Dr. Simon used hypnosis to treat the Hills over the course of several months. Betty and Barney Hill said the therapy helped them recover some memories of their missing 2 hours. 5 years later, the bizarre experience of Betty and Barney Hill became legendary as a cover story in Look magazine and a book entitled The Interrupted Journey. It was the first reported alien abduction in the United States. The Hills psychiatrist, Dr. Simon, remained skeptical of their account. However, once the case was made public, other witnesses came forward with similar stories. Authors like Dr. David M. Jacobs call them abductions.
Well, the core abduction scenario involves basically a person who is taken out of his or her normal environment, usually against their will, and taken on board an object, a UFO if you will, and the clothes are removed, they're placed on a table, they're given a mental, physical, and kind of reproductive series of examinations, procedures, and then they're released, brought back, and they forget about what happened to them almost immediately, although they might know that something strange has happened. They don't necessarily connect it to the abduction phenomenon.
Beginning with the Hills, most abductees have made sketches to illustrate their experience. They often picture the strange beings they encounter, now known as Greys.
The most predominant one are the small gray aliens and taller gray aliens as well. The taller gray aliens seem to be more in charge in the abduction scenario. The smaller gray aliens seem to be more assistants or helpers. These are beings that are thin, have no hair, large heads, very large black eyes, no pupils in them, just sort of opaque. No nose to speak of, although there might be a little bump or a ridge there.
Many abduction cases include a face-to-face encounter with Greys. Among the most credible was the incident reported by 4 college friends after a harrowing trip in the summer of 1976. Betty and Barney Hill's abduction experience in September 1961 was the first such case reported in the United States. But in the following decades, accounts of alien abduction became increasingly common. Few stories were as sensational as the experience reported by 4 friends who took what was supposed to be an ordinary camping trip. To those who catalog such reports, this UFO encounter is known as the Allagash incident. In the summer of 1976, art students Charlie Fultz, Chuck Rack, and twins Jack and Jim Weiner traveled north from Boston into the wilderness of Maine. For nearly a week, the trip was everything they hoped it would be, a carefree escape from city life. On the 5th day, they camped near Smith Pond, an isolated, stump-filled swamp. It was a perfect spot for night fishing. It was also the place where their lives would change forever.
There was no moon that night. It was real dark, and we didn't want to get lost. So we said, well, the thing to do is make a big fire so we can see it, and then we know which way to paddle when we want to get back to camp later.
And it was quite large, but we cleared around the fire, so there was no problem. And these flames were leaping a good 3 or 4 feet up into the air.
With their makeshift lighthouse aglow, the 4 men left their campsite behind. They paddled several hundred yards out into the pond, headed for a night of fishing they would never forget, and one they would later illustrate in their artwork.
I remember being in the back of the canoe, paddling leisurely. The 2 twins were in the middle. Charlie was in the front. And I remember they were having a conversation, and I was focusing on the night and the lake and the water. And I began to feel observed.
And then all of a sudden, Chuck Rack, who was at the back of the canoe, said, holy mackerel, what the is that? And I turned around and looked, and there was this huge, bright light that was coming out of the trees. It seemed like it was rising out of the trees. At first, we thought, well, it's got to be an airplane or something, right? So we watched it for a few seconds and realized that it wasn't an airplane because it wasn't making any sound at all. It was strange, very strange.
It was a bright, luminous yellow-white, and changing from that color in a very fluid, liquid kind of a way. And we were very, very fascinated. I was in a state of extreme euphoria. I remember just feeling, wow, this is fantastic.
It was just alive. And when it was nearest us, about 100 yards away, it paused. And when it paused, I said to the fellows, I said, I'm going to shine the flashlight and see what it does.
The instant he flashed his flashlight, this thing sent this beam of light out to us. And we were in a 16-foot aluminum Grumman canoe, which in the pitch black of night lit up like a Roman candle. We must have looked like this object just waiting to be approached on this lake.
And all I can tell you is what was going through my mind was just exhilarating expectation. Just, this is fantastic. This is something we can communicate with. It's tempting to communicate with us.
I was completely shocked, and especially shocked that it reacted as quickly as it did, which told us there was some type of intelligence about it. And as soon as this light came out, this thing started moving, and so we thought, well, you know, this is real. This is really happening. This is not a figment of our imagination. I mean, we've got to deal with this situation now, because within a few seconds, this thing is going to be right on us.
I wasn't even interested in this thing anymore, other than I didn't want to be as close to it as I was.
I remember paddling as fast as I could, and Jack saying, "It's getting closer, it's getting closer."
And then it was gone. The next thing they remembered, they were back on shore.
And I thought, well, that's it. We've lost our chance. We've let it slip through our fingers. And I observed it leaving and just gradually faded out.
Exhausted, the four men stumbled back to their campsite. There they found the remains of their makeshift lighthouse. The fire that had been built to last for hours. The fire that was now just a pile of charred embers. At the time, no one gave it much thought, though it would later play a large role in their sighting. That night, nothing more was discussed. Not the fire, not the unknown object that had chased them only moments before. Sleep was the only thing on their minds. For years, the friends rarely talked about that strange night. Then, in 1978, memories of the sighting began to resurface. Jim Weiner had developed temporal epilepsy after a car accident and suffered periodic seizures. These fits were often triggered by sleep deprivation, and by 1980, Jim was definitely not sleeping well. Vivid nightmares had become a perpetual torment.
All I remember is seeing vague figures, anthropomorphic in shape, but they did not seem human to me. They were around me, and they were either doing things with my genitals, or they were prodding me with some types of instruments. There was an extreme feeling of malevolence. I mean, I was absolutely always felt terrified in this situation.
For a time, Jim kept his nightmares secret. Then he confided in his brother. Jack Weiner's reaction was totally unexpected.
So he starts telling me this, my nightmare, on the phone, and I go, holy mackerel, I've been having the same nightmares. What is going on here?
There was no apparent explanation, but Jim was getting worse, his doctors growing more concerned. Repeatedly, they asked Jim what was wrong, and he finally revealed the nightmares. A psychiatrist working on the case said it sounded like an abduction experience. The doctor suggested that Jim speak to Ray Fowler, a UFO researcher. Jim repeated his story. Fowler took it seriously. Later, the other three also underwent hypnosis. Finally, 4 years after the incident, the details of that terrifying August night would emerge. When four college friends set off for a camping trip in August of 1976, they never dreamed they would end up at the epicenter of one of the most famous cases in UFO history. They all remembered paddling onto a pond and seeing a spectacular light in the sky. Then it came closer, far too close for comfort. The next thing the men recalled was standing on shore. Only later would they suspect that something more sinister had taken place. Regression hypnosis revealed that the four friends had apparently endured a horrific episode known as an alien abduction. It began with the menacing approach of a UFO.
One of the things I remembered very clearly was Jack saying that it's gaining on us. And I remember suddenly being enveloped in this tube of light. And I remembered looking up, and I was thinking about, what the heck is that up there? You know, like, what's up there? And that took a few seconds, and then I looked back again, and Chuck Rack's gone. The last thing I remembered was having both hands on the side of the canoe, looking out at the water to see if Chuck was in the water, And then not seeing them and thinking, oh my God, you know, what happened to Chuck? And then looking up, and then the next thing I remembered was this just intense feeling of almost like I was coming apart or something. That's the only way I can describe it. Then the next thing I remembered was being on my back in this hazy environment, which was just like this nightmare that I'd been having.
All four friends seem to recall a similar traumatic experience.
I'm lying on my back, and I'm disoriented. I'm not sure where I am. As I'm forcing and struggling to get up, a face appears and looks straight down at
It reminded me of insects. I remember thinking, my God, these things look like bugs. They had like large eyes, almost like ants have. They could have been goggles for all I know, but and they had some kind of clothing on, like spandex. I became focused on this thing's hand and realizing that it was not a hand like ours at all. And this one had me by the wrist and he was holding my arm up and he had something else in his hand. But I didn't like the looks of it. And I remember thinking, oh boy, here we go. This is it. I got 5 seconds to live. They're going to cut me open. They're going to dissect me, whatever. I just want to get out of here. Get me out of here.
It would take hours under hypnosis before the four men fully detailed the alien examinations. Later, they recalled the peculiar events that brought them back down to Earth.
They moved us again into this other space, this room. Then this area in front of me started changing somehow. It was doing something. It was some type of machine or something. It was very strange. And the last thing I remembered thinking was, here we go. I don't know what's going to happen next, but something is happening.
Under regressive hypnosis, I remember the aliens trying to put me in the canoe. There was one of them standing in the canoe over me, trying to adjust my position in the back of the canoe, and another one was sort of waist deep in the water right next to me. And then they tried to position Jim Wiener in front of me, but he's heavier, and they were having a hard time with him. And then the other two were beamed right on land, and then Jim got out to join them.
As their recollections took shape, the four men learned why their roaring campfire had seemed to burn out so quickly. To those who investigate abduction cases, it's known as missing time. Perhaps as much as 3 hours had passed during the abduction, from the time the men first saw the UFO until the time they found themselves standing on the beach. Meanwhile, their fire had burned down to embers. Hypnosis had restored their recollections of the missing time with unsparing intensity. But now there was no hiding from the memories, no hiding from the trauma of what had apparently happened at Smith Pond.
I mean, every time I had one of these experiences, you know, I would rationalize it as a dream so I could cope with it and say, well, what the heck is really going on here? You know, is it related to my seizure disorder? Is it, you know, something I'm eating? Do I have a brain tumor? You know, am I working too hard, or am I under a lot of stress? What the heck could possibly cause this kind of repetitive experience?
The Allagash Four are not alone. Their story is remarkably similar to the accounts of thousands of other ordinary people who face the nightmarish certainty that they have been in the hands of aliens. Still, despite all the convincing testimony, the subject of alien abductions is the source of bitter controversy. As sensational as the Allagash incident may seem, it is simply one of the thousands of abduction cases that have been reported. Among UFO researchers, it is regarded as a reliable report with solid eyewitness testimony. Indeed, for those who have examined it confirms that at least some people have come face to face with alien creatures.
If you had the amount of evidence for the reality of the Allagash abductions for any other subject, any mundane subject, in a court of law, you could hang a person probably. But because of the bizarre nature of the case, that's not going to happen. People aren't going to accept that evidence, although the evidence is there.
The evidence includes 4 men who were psychologically examined and given polygraph tests before undergoing hypnosis. 4 men who reported remarkably similar accounts of the same event. 4 men who have spent the past several years trying to come to grips with the fact that they were part of something out of their realm of understanding.
I've heard it all, everything. Oh, they must have been on LSD, and people have said, I don't believe a word you say, you're nuts, you're crazy, you belong in a straitjacket. And I say, well, it's part of my life, I can't deny it. And one of the things that's really weird is that you find yourself getting used to the idea that you've been abducted, and that's weird in itself. I mean, how do you get used to something like that?
It has been over 20 years since the alleged encounter. The Allagash incident has been added to the body of reports that argue the abduction phenomenon is real. But this case is not without its own controversy. While 3 of the men are confident the event took place, the 4th is now not so sure.
I'm not denying this happened. I'm just skeptical about the abduction part of the story. To that extent, it wasn't like a visceral reality experience. It wasn't like a true memory. And that's what I had trouble with for years and years and years. Certainly, I shared the experience with the rest of the guys, and they might take that as remembering a real experience, but it's not. The encounter is real. I know that. But regressive hypnosis several years later, I don't know.
The fact that Chuck Rack backed off his abduction story, to me it doesn't have too much significance. Maybe he has since thought about this thing and doesn't want to think it actually happened to him, but nonetheless, his recollections of what occurred back then are consistent with what the others have remembered, either consciously or through hypnosis.
However, researchers like Kevin Randall, who is convinced that UFOs are real, continue to question the Allagash abduction.
They clearly had a UFO sighting. Clearly that event took place. But we've now blurred the boundary between reality and fantasy. We worked for thousands of years so that we understood that dreams were dreams. They were fantasy. They were not necessarily a reflection of reality. And yet in abduction research, if you dream about being abducted, well, that's all accurate information. And we've got to get back and take a solid psychological look at this.
Yet, not all abductions can be written off as dreams. In fact, neither Betty and Barney Hill nor the Allagash Four were even asleep when their abduction was said to have taken place. Among the many controversies surrounding abductions is the use of hypnosis to recall the experience. The technique was first used in 1961 by Dr. Benjamin Simon in the case of Betty and Barney Hill. Advocates of hypnosis claim it can help to unlock suppressed memories and provide investigators with details of unearthly and often frightening events.
I use hypnosis to help people relax, and in a relaxed trance state, they seem to have access to these memories which have been, as it were, systematically blocked by the UFO occupants.
New York City artist and best-selling author Bud Hopkins is one of the leading pioneers in UFO abduction research. Hopkins claims that since 1975, he has unearthed an enormous number of similar incidents. His two books, Intruders and Missing Time, have set the standards for investigating this mysterious phenomenon.
A typical hypnosis session starts with a very sharp, clear focus on a particular event. Let's say two people in a car and the car stopping, and they see a UFO. Everyone is paralyzed. They cannot move. Often the ship will land on the highway or hover, and little figures, small gray figures with huge black eyes, will approach the car. Usually what happens next, if the craft is on the highway, they walk up into it, but more often if it's hovering, they go up a beam of light.
Perhaps surprisingly, many of Hopkins' alien abduction reports come not from isolated backwoods locales, but from high-rise buildings and automobiles in New York City. His subjects report smooth, gray beings, missing time, human experiments, and paralysis. It all sounds like science fiction gone wild, yet hundreds of seemingly ordinary people report these experiences.
I'm 46 years old. I have two grown kids. My daughter's 23, my son is 20. I've been married for 26 years, and I've earned a good living as a musician and a graphic artist. And for all intents and purposes, have lived a very dull, normal, mundane kind of a life.
But John says he's been abducted at night from his home in New York City.
They usually start at home in the middle of the night. I'll be in a dead sleep, and I'll either jump up with a start and they'll be in the room, and then the paralysis comes on where I just can't move.
Rosemary says she was lured by aliens to the roof of her apartment in Midtown Manhattan.
I've been coming up the apartment stairs on my fifth floor apartment, and I saw this strange light coming through the skylight. And the minute I got up to the roof, there was this dark circle in the sky. And I noticed it for a few seconds, and then suddenly a beam of light came and hit me and paralyzed me and started to lift me up into the bottom of this round disc-shaped thing.
And I'll be taken out of the house and on board a craft, and the medical procedures are performed. I remember it's a round room. There's a pedestal table in the middle of this thing. There are instruments and things that come right out of the walls and from the ceiling. I'll be placed on the table. I'm immobilized. I can't move.
Basically, they just put me on a table, and then some kind of a device came down and hit me in the chest because I wasn't breathing very well. And there were these beings around me.
This taller being will come over, and there's usually a few of them around me at that point, and one is acting kind of as an anesthetist, where he's keeping me calmed and reassured, while the other guy is performing all of these really painful, intrusive physical procedures.
Ultimately, abduction cases rest on the credibility of the witnesses themselves.
If you trace the history of this, before this subject was even known, Before it was all over television, before people were aware of it, the patterns were already established. So it seems to me there are only two apparent possible explanations for this. Either they really are being abducted, or there is some totally unprecedented, unknown mass hallucination or delusion going on, and that should be of great interest to science too.
Clearly, no one would believe or even take seriously the abduction phenomenon if there was only one person who was telling these tales, regardless of the social pedigree of that person or the prominence of the investigator who investigated that person. We would just say, well, that person's hallucinating, deluded, crazy. So the reason that the abduction phenomenon is a phenomenon is that many people report abductions with conviction, and that they report similar details of the experience. So the question is, where does this consistency of storyline arise from? Even if people were hallucinating, why are the hallucinations the same?
While abduction scenarios are similar from case to case, most have unique details, often overlooked in media coverage of the incident. For example, in the Betty and Barney Hill abduction, it was not generally reported that Barney had dentures. According to Betty Hill's account, dentures were apparently a novelty to the alien abductors.
They come in and they start pulling on Betty's teeth. They were in separate rooms on board the craft. And she's trying to find out what's going on. Well, they don't understand how Barney's teeth come out and hers don't. Now, who would make up a story like that?
The human brain is the most complex object known of in the universe. We know of nothing more complex. And it produces a vast range of conscious states, mind states. So somebody's driving along, and they've been driving at night for hours upon hours upon hours. They go into trance, and the next thing they know, they're being miraculously floated off up into a spaceship. If you look at the idea of floating off to a spaceship, you are looking at perfect description of an out-of-body experience, a lucid dream experience. There's a whole gamut, a whole range of sleep disorders that fit in absolute detail everything that an abductee describes. What we have is a total ignorance of these states of consciousness.
These states of consciousness include not only lucid dreams and out-of-body experiences, but sleep paralysis and near-death experiences as well. All are currently being researched. None are yet fully understood. Perhaps such alternate states of consciousness will prove to be the underlying cause of purported alien encounters. However, in the event such research can't explain away abductions, most people still won't find it any easier to accept that these bizarre events truly occur.
We've been conditioned to believe certain things as regarding what society, what scientists, what theologians tell us exists and what doesn't exist. And when something intrudes into this reality and doesn't fit, it's taboo because people don't want to accept this because it affects their worldview. So this goes across science, theology, you name it. It's very hard to accept things that just don't fit our preconceived notions of what should be and what shouldn't be.
What is the truth about alien abductions? While some believe that the explanation lies in some distant galaxy, at least one scientist is finding answers within the confines of an Earth-bound laboratory. Alien abductions have been reported now for well over 30 years. Many are described in chilling detail by extremely credible eyewitnesses. Yet one fundamental question persists. Are these truly real experiences, or are they somehow imagined? At Laurentian University in Ontario, Canada, neuroscientist Michael Persinger is testing a new theory. Persinger believes that false memories of abductions may actually be created by electrical disturbances within the brain itself.
This is a human brain that's been fixed. As you see, there are two halves, the left hemisphere, the right hemisphere, and the temporal lobes are along the sides here that wrap around under. And these areas are very electrically unstable and very sensitive. And indeed, this is the area of the brain that involve, well, the gateway to memory. Dreams, intense fantasies that are so real you swear they are true, as well as the part of the brain that's involved with meaningfulness. Meaningfulness of a cosmic and sometimes even religious level, deep within the temporal lobe.
Persinger suggests that if the temporal lobe is electrically stimulated, it will conjure up mental images resembling alien abductions. To test his theory, Dr. Persinger designed a special laboratory where volunteers can be subjected to controlled electrical brain stimulation.
Okay. Too tight.
Undergraduate student Mike Ziegel was chosen for this experiment after a screening ruled out signs of epilepsy or seizure disorder. He has reported no UFO-related experiences.
What we do is we use a motorcycle helmet, put it over the head. On both sides of the motorcycle helmet there are solenoids embedded in it. A solenoid is a device that allows you to deliver weak magnetic fields. The magnetic fields are then passed through the brain, very weak fields. Less than that, a hair blow dryer. But the computers which run the patterns are programmed to simulate or imitate the firing pattern of the deep structures of the temporal lobe.
As a programmed sequence is initiated, waveforms from the computer are sent to the brain of the subject.
If we stimulate the temporal lobe towards the caudal or back part, it'd be visual experiences. Towards the front, smell experiences. But the fundamental experience is that of movement, feeling out of your body, feeling displaced, feeling the sense of a presence as if someone else is in the room with you, feeling intrusive thoughts as if thoughts are coming from outside you, ego alien thoughts.
This pattern, Persinger believes, will produce an experience with many of the components of an alien abduction.
I remember feeling very light for a while, just drifting. Then I remember everything just sort of went black, and a feeling of complete weightlessness. I started seeing patterns of lights, and then all of a sudden in an instant I feel as though there's another presence there, someone there. I can feel it. I'm almost sure that if I turn my head, I know I'm going to see something there. The hairs on the back of your neck seem to stand. It's as if someone's breathing in your ear. I saw sort of distorted images of people that I knew, or at least I thought I knew. And then I felt this tremendous sort of rush of fear, tremendous anxiety. I wanted to get out. If I could have ripped off the electrodes and gotten out of the room, I would have. My legs felt like they weighed 2 tons. I couldn't have moved them if I wanted to. And I just felt cold. I started to shiver.
It was here that the experience took on the startling characteristics of an encounter with the aliens known as Greys.
The lights were most definitely white, pure white. And then I saw the people. And then I felt this rush of fear. And as far as the people, they were grayish. It was a grayish color. They seemed to not really shine, just like wax. That's pretty much the only way I could describe it, like wax. Grayish, elongated wax people.
Persinger's tests raise an obvious question. What natural force could duplicate the electrical stimulation so carefully orchestrated in the lab? It has long been known that movements of the Earth's crust can produce bursts of light in the atmosphere. According to Dr. Persinger, these luminous displays release electromagnetic charges that can trigger abduction-like thoughts, just as in his tests. Did Betty and Barney Hill witness such a luminous display? Are abductees like the Allagash 4 victims of a similar flash of energy?
The duration of the events, they're not just brief bursts of things. They're very elaborate, detailed stories. The Hill case, the Allagash case, and hundreds of other cases. They often involve other people. The notion that you've got somehow natural electromagnetic waves affecting two people identically so that their stories match and jibe makes no sense at all.
In the end, abduction cases remain the most troubling of the UFO accounts. They offer little or no physical evidence as proof and rely almost exclusively on personal testimony.
I don't know.
Yet if even one of the thousands of stories is true, it suggests a most unappetizing possibility: that humanity is at the mercy of superior beings that can do with us as they please.